So, have you ever had that feeling, where you're trying really hard to improve things at work, maybe make a difference, but it just feels like pushing a massive rock uphill?
Oh, absolutely. Or um, maybe you notice this gap, right, between what the organization says it values and what actually happens day to day.
Exactly. That disconnect, if that's hitting home for you listening, well, you're definitely in the right spot today.
Mm.
Because that exact frustration, that feeling of wanting impact but feeling a bit stuck, that's precisely what our source material tackles head on.
Yeah, we've been looking at executives' compass, organizational impact, advocacy, and organizational influence.
And it really echoes the kinds of challenges leaders, like the nurse executives mentioned in the source, face when they're trying to drive real, meaningful change.
And what's really insightful, I think, is how it frames leadership. It argues that, well, true impact isn't just about managing the day-to-day efficiently.
Right.
It's about mastering advocacy and influence. That's presented as the key, really, to moving beyond just coping with the system.
And actually starting to shape it, becoming an architect of change, as you said.
Precisely.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. We want to pull out the actionable wisdom from this source. Think of it as a guide for you to move from just managing your workload to genuinely influencing your environment.
And crucially, it's not just about having a fancy title or formal power.
No.
The source really highlights that real influence often comes from other things, like the courage to speak up,
Yeah.
having real clarity about what needs to change, and just being consistent in how you act and what you stand for.
It's about how you show up, isn't it? Regardless of where you sit on the org chart.
Exactly. It's about the impact you make through your presence and principles.
Okay, let's dive in then. One of the first things from the source that really made me pause was this idea about advocacy. It's not just lobbying or policy work.
No, not at all.
It's fundamentally about presence. What does that really mean in practice? It's more than just being in the room, surely.
Well, it's about how you're present. The source gives examples, like nurse executives, who actively shape things through their conviction.
Okay.
They build trust because they're consistent. And they actively work to align the systems, the processes, the structures with the values the organization claims to have.
Ah, so it's connecting the dots between words and actions.
Exactly. That's what
Yeah.
drives the real shifts, culturally and operationally. Think about a leader who doesn't just say they value staff input, but consistently makes time, asks questions, listens intently, and then actually acts on what they hear.
That visibility, that follow-through, that's advocacy in action.
Right. That builds incredible influence over time.
So it's moving from constantly fighting fires, like dealing with burnout after it's already widespread, to proactively building a fire-resistant structure, advocating for the conditions that actually prevent burnout in the first place.
Yes, exactly, that proactive stance. The source talks about moving from treating symptoms to actually redesigning the systems causing the problems.
Yeah. Which sounds great, but how do you even spot where the system is starting to, well, falter?
That leads directly to this concept the source calls organizational drift.
Right, I liked that term, organizational drift. It feels familiar, even if I hadn't heard that exact phrase, that slow slide away from the mission.
That's it, precisely. The source defines it as that gradual, often almost invisible deviation from the core mission, the vision, the values.
Like a boat slowly drifting off course without anyone quite noticing until you're way off track.
Exactly. There's not usually one big dramatic event, but lots of small cumulative shifts.
And why is catching this drift so critical? It sounds a bit philosophical, but the impact is real, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely real. The source really drills down on the consequences. What's said that, the values plastered on the website or the walls doesn't match the lived reality.
Yeah.
Staff engagement drops.
Yeah.
Trust erodes. People are smart. They see the disconnect.
If leaders preach teamwork but reward individual heroics or talk about well-being but overload everyone, people notice that hypocrisy.
They really do. And that disconnect is poison for morale and commitment.
Okay, so it's clearly important to spot this drift. How do you actually go about doing that? The source mentioned a drift audit. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's a really practical tool suggested in the material. The core idea is for leadership teams to carve out dedicated time for some really honest reflection.
Like in a regular meeting.
Could be,
Yeah.
or a dedicated session. And the source suggests asking some tough questions, like, where are our actions actually out of sync with our mission?
Oof, that requires honesty.
Definitely. And also, what do we say we value? Maybe it's innovation, maybe patient safety, maybe staff growth, but we don't actually measure it or reward it. or put real resources behind it.
That's a good one. Where's the budget allocated versus the stated priorities?
Exactly. And maybe the most crucial one, where are people telling us, directly or indirectly, that things aren't aligned? What are the signals, verbal or nonverbal?
Listening to the front line, basically.
Mm.
Paying attention to the whispers or even the silences.
Right. It's about creating that space for a candid look in the mirror. Of course, a big challenge there is psychological safety, making sure people feel they can be honest without negative consequences.
True. So once you've done this audit, had that potentially uncomfortable conversation, and identified an area of drift, what's next? You can't fix everything at once.
No. And the source emphasizes focus. Pick one key area of drift that feels like a priority. Just one.
Okay.
And then design a concrete advocacy step, something tangible you can do to start closing that specific gap.
So not just identifying the problem, but taking an initial action.
Exactly. Even a small step. If the audit shows, say, a gap in supporting new managers, despite valuing leadership development,
Right.
a small advocacy step might be proposing a pilot mentoring program for one department, just to get started.
Getting traction. Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us to how you advocate effectively. The source talks about combining evidence and emotion, data and stories.
It's a really powerful mix. The material makes the point that influence rarely comes just from charts and spreadsheets.
Data is important, though.
Oh, absolutely essential. Data shows patterns, it quantifies risks, highlights successes. You need the evidence. But it's often the stories, the human side, that actually connects with people on an emotional level and motivates them to act.
Makes the data meaningful.
Exactly. Numbers might show a problem, like rising turnover, but a compelling, perhaps anonymized, story about why someone left, the impact it had, that can move hearts and influence decisions about budgets, policies, maybe even strategic direction.
So you present the data on patient wait times, for example, but you also share a brief story about an anxious patient who felt lost in the system because of those delays.
Precisely. That blend of the rational and the emotional, that's where effective advocacy often lies.
Okay. And to really understand what to advocate for, the source brings in systems thinking. Why is that perspective so vital here?
Well, systems thinking, as the source explains it, is about taking that step back, zooming out, as they put it.
Seeing the bigger picture.
Right. Instead of just reacting to the immediate, visible problem, the symptom, you try to understand the whole web of interconnected factors that are creating it.
Looking for those underlying structures, the patterns, the feedback loops that might be keeping the problem in place.
Exactly. Are we unintentionally reinforcing the very issue we're trying to solve? By understanding those root causes, your advocacy becomes much smarter, much more targeted.
You're not just putting a bandage on the symptom, you're trying to fix the underlying condition.
Precisely. And the source points out this often means you can't do it alone. You need to build coalitions.
Work with others across departments or teams.
Yeah, find others who see the same systemic issue, maybe from a different angle, and work together. Complex systems need collaborative solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. Then the source talks about something called redesigning for wholeness. That sounds quite profound. What's the idea there?
It really is a step beyond just fixing problems. It's about advocating for environments where well-being isn't just a program or a benefit.
Like a yoga class or a mindfulness app.
Right. Those can be helpful, but this is deeper. It's about weaving well-being into the actual fabric of how work gets done, how people connect, how leadership is practiced. For everyone, not just patients.
So integrated, not bolted on.
Exactly. And the source uses this interesting phrase, transmuting the culture.
Transmuting, like alchemy.
Sort of. It implies a deeper, more fundamental transformation than just improving the culture. It's about creating something genuinely different, healthier, more sustainable.
Can you give an example? What might wholeness or transmuting look like?
Well, maybe it's building in regular protected time for teams to actually reflect and debrief after stressful periods, making it a non-negotiable part of the workflow.
Not just hoping people cope on their own.
Right. Or it could be a fundamental shift from a culture that focuses on blame when things go wrong to one centered on learning and psychological safety, where raising concerns is encouraged, not punished.
That feels like a huge but necessary shift for many places.
Huge, yes. But that's the level of advocacy redesigning for wholeness points towards.
Okay, so this all sounds powerful, but maybe a bit daunting. The source does offer a practical framework, though, right? Speak up with substance.
It does. It's a really clear three-step approach for making your advocacy constructive and impactful.
Okay, let's break it down. Step 1.
Step 1 is clarify. Use real data, specific examples, concrete observations to clearly define the issue. No vague complaints. Get specific.
Nail down the one. Okay. Step 2.
Step 2 is connect. Link that specific issue directly back to the organization's purpose, its mission, its stated values, its strategic aims. Why does this problem matter in the bigger picture? How does it hinder what we're trying to achieve?
Show the relevance. Got it. And the third step.
The third step is challenge. This isn't about being aggressive, but about prompting action. Ask the team or the leaders involved.
Yeah.
Okay, given this issue and its connection to our mission, what are we actually prepared to do about it? What changes are we willing to make?
So clarify the problem, connect it to purpose, and challenge for action.
That's the framework.
And I like how the source emphasizes this isn't about being confrontational. It calls it care in action. Reframing advocacy not as complaining or criticizing, but as a positive act of leadership. You're caring enough about the organization and its people to raise the difficult issue and push for solutions.
Precisely. It positions advocacy as responsible leadership, contributing to the overall health and effectiveness of the whole system.
Which is a great mindset shift. Now, to help listeners internalize this, the source included some reflective questions, didn't it? Like journal prompts.
Yes, really valuable ones for personal reflection.
Let's show those. The first one asks you, the listener, what's one tangible way your voice has made a positive difference in your organization this past year?
It's important to acknowledge your own impact, however small it might seem. Give yourself credit.
Absolutely. The second one encourages a bit more vulnerability. Where, in your current role or interactions, are you consciously holding back your voice?
Yeah, what's stopping you? Is it fear, fatigue, just uncertainty about how to even start?
Yeah.
Getting honest about those internal barriers. And the final prompt is really about taking that next step. What's one specific, even if small, act of advocacy that you can realistically commit to undertaking this week?
I love that one. It makes it manageable. It's not about boiling the ocean. It's about consistent, small steps.
Because those small acts accumulate, right? They build momentum.
Exactly. And that really ties back to the core message here. Influence through advocacy isn't always about the grand gestures.
No.
It's often about that consistent, thoughtful effort to keep bringing the conversation back to the core values, back to the mission, back to what truly matters for the people and the purpose of the organization.
It sounds like it's about building a more robust foundation, designing systems, shaping a culture that's inherently aligned, inherently healthier.
Yes. So you're not always just reacting, always patching things up. You're building something sustainable.
Right. More proactive, less reactive. That's the goal. So maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is this. How can you start applying these ideas? Spotting that subtle drift, speaking up with substance in your own world right where you are.
Regardless of your job title.
Absolutely. Advocacy is available to everyone. So what's that one small, maybe slightly courageous act of advocacy you could choose to take? Maybe even tomorrow.